Greetings from the JAARS Center in Waxhaw, North Carolina. I'm Mike Maurer, the Director of the JAARS Missions at the Airport Program of Public Relations Outreach of JAARS. I would have been in charge of the JAARS participation at Smoketown this year, but am coming to you in this virtual event from North Carolina. I served in the Philippines for 20 years as a pilot mechanic before coming to JAARS for the Missions at the Airport program. JAARS exists to help make Bible translation possible through transportation, technology, and media services, even in the most remote areas of the world. Like you, JAARS has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic, both here in the United States and abroad. At the JAARS Center, except for essential personnel, we have been working from home, where we have transitioned to Zoom meetings and technology-based solutions to continue the work of JAARS. One of the key responses to the pandemic has been to open housing at the JAARS Center for our personnel and the personnel of partner organizations to have a safe and friendly place to land and quarantine as they have been evacuated from the countries where they normally live and serve. The JAARS Aviation Department transitioned from aviation-related research and development to the manufacture of personal protective face shields for the JAARS community and to distribute to local healthcare providers. A large number of people at JAARS mobilized to sew face masks and protective gowns for the community and healthcare facilities. The pandemic struck right in the middle of the JAARS Aviation Pre-Field Flight Orientation, or PFO. PFO is the final training undertaken by aviation personnel before they depart to their fields of service. People in this PFO will be serving with JAARS, South American Mission, African Inland Mission, and Asas de Socorro in Brazil as pilot mechanics, maintenance specialists, and in aviation administration. As things began to shut down, the JAARS Aviation Training Department quickly developed online learning options for the normal classroom sessions, and then after several weeks returned to the skies for flight training. This year's PFO class will complete their training in mid-August, only a little over a month behind their original completion date. Overseas, as coronavirus protocols were established in the countries where our airplanes fly, the amount of flying dropped significantly. Some medical flights and flights to deliver personal protective equipment were allowed. Recently, in some countries, limited flying for missionary families has been allowed to resume as well. One project JAARS has been working on has been the relicensing of the boat Quadima II for maritime service in the Milne Bay area of Papua New Guinea. That service has recently begun. During the pandemic, Bible translation has continued, and the JAARS core mission to support Bible translation effort continues. Matt and Christy Taylor, translators in Papua New Guinea, report that the Nukna people recently received written and audio copies of the New Testament books from Galatians through Philemon. A JAARS airplane was able to deliver the books and audio players to the people. Due to COVID restrictions, the Taylors were not allowed to travel to the village, but the villagers intend to hold a dedication celebration on their own. Pray for the Nukna and other people groups as they receive God's Word in their language. And as they read and listen to that Word, lives will be transformed.
It's good to see you. Good to be with you. Thank you for the virtual invite to Smoketown. You know, I'm really sorry we can't be there because MAF is celebrating 75 years of service in missionary aviation. It'd be great to be at Smoketown with you, showing what God has done through these years. But because of the COVID thing, we can't be there. So it's good to talk to you, and I'm sorry we can't be closer face to face. And so probably the first question that would come up is what is MAF doing with all this that's happening? And a lot of our flight operations around the world have been scaled way back. We've had to do that, but we've been able to keep a lot of our emergency flights going, plus flights that supply or resupply or bring training and education to some of the communities to help them understand what's going on. So we haven't shut down completely, but we're doing a lot less flying because of that. Now recently, we've been able to start flying some of our mission families again, and then, like I said earlier, we have been able to do some of the more critical emergency flights that seem to be what we're always involved in. So we've kept going. One of the other problems we've had is we have had our staff stuck around the world. Some people that were coming back to the U.S. that got stuck en route, others that have not been able to come back for planned furloughs or time back in the States with family. It has disrupted things pretty well, but you know, we're kind of used to that in MAF. Almost every flight, you have to make changes. The weather changes, the schedule changes. We're used to that. So we have made changes. We're trying to roll with it. We certainly haven't quit. We just had 4 new families join MAF just a couple weeks ago. Out in the hangar, we're preparing 2 Cessna Caravans to go over to Africa. So we're still rolling. Yeah, it's a change, but we're still moving forward and look and say, God, what are you trying to teach us through all of this? There are still people that live in very remote parts of the world. And that continues to be our aim, to get into those areas that are isolated, whether it's terrain or politics or whatever it is, to tell people that there's a God that deeply loves them, a God that gave his son for them, and we can show that we care for them, particularly through all this COVID stuff with our airplanes. So we may be around for another 75 years. Who knows? And maybe, Glenn, next year we can see you guys again at Smoketown. I've always appreciated Smoketown. It's small, it's fun, it's intimate. It's not as big as Oshkosh or Sun and Fun, but it's a good time of the church coming together and say, this is what God's doing through missionary aviation. So thanks for the invite, and we'll see you next year in Smoketown.
Hello there, how are y'all today? Hope you're encouraged in the Lord. I am coming to you from my office in McNeil, Arizona, where I am at the International Center for Administration and Training for ETHNOS 360 Aviation. We've been around since 1942 as ETHNOS 360 Church Planters. We were founded as New Tribes Mission. We renamed to ETHNOS 360 a few years ago to coincide with our 75th anniversary, as well as to reflect a different atmosphere of how missions go about being presented these days and our role in that. But our goal is still the same. We want to see a thriving church for every people. We focus on unreached people groups who usually do not have any written language. So that means we need to learn to speak their language. Then we can teach biblical truths in a language that's understandable to the people group to whom we're ministering. While we're learning a language, we're developing the alphabet, and then we're teaching people to read, because we're preparing them for the day when they'll be able to read God's Word for themselves. They can teach themselves, they can teach their children, they can even carry God's Word beyond their own village to the neighboring people groups. And aviation makes it easier to get into those locations where unreached peoples live. But then as a church planting missionary who's learning language and culture, how do you survive in a place where there's no grocery store or no hospital or no schools? Do you spend all your time just living? Well, that's where we come in. We're advancing the spread of the gospel through aviation to see a thriving church for every people. We'll use a Quest Kodiak airplane or a Robinson helicopter. We'll drop off the mail or a month's supply of groceries. We'll evacuate sick people. We'll transport school students. We'll help people rebuild their village after a tsunami or an earthquake or some natural disaster destroys their home or livelihood. In one location in Papua New Guinea, the closest airstrip to a village is a 2-day hike. This is one particular village, but instead of a 2-day hike, it's only an 8-minute flight with our helicopter. Our pilot Mike says it's got to be done with aviation. That's the story all over this country. Another location in Papua New Guinea is home to the Kaje people, another mountainous region where the Kaje travel over footpaths. We've been keeping 3 missionary families supplied there for a number of years to sustain them while they've learned language and learned culture and studied. And the reason we did that is because the Kaji people had not had a clear witness of the gospel until last year. August through December 2019, the Kaji heard the amazing love story of their Creator told through daily teachings. And many of the Kaji people opened their hearts to Christ's invitation of true life. And how cool is that? Those new believers, that new church, is now growing in grace because aviation played a role in planting a new church. And that is so cool. We believe that Jesus is coming again, don't we? And shouldn't we try to give the opportunity for everyone to hear God's word? Yeah, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. But as our pilot Mike says, we feel an urgency to get the gospel out. And how efficient is it when you have a team to make that happen? So I want to say thanks to you for attending this year's Smoketown Mission Aviation and Technology Fair. If you're here and listening, then I believe you have an interest in what God is doing around the world. If you're interested in going deeper with who we are as ETHNOS 360 Aviation, I invite you to check out our website, ethnos360aviation.org. When you're there, you can click out the Serve tab, where you'll find a list of all kinds of things of people that we need. Aviation people, support people, volunteer positions, and you can fill something. Maybe you'd be interested in seeing how it is to support an aircraft to keep costs affordable for missionary church planters. Check out the flight sponsorship page. You can go to ethnos360.org and click on the Go tab, and you'll find a list, and one of those words at the bottom of the list is Wyoming. Looks like Wyoming, but it's pronounced Wyoming. You can schedule a visit for yourself or your church missions team to attend some What's It Like in a Tribal Village? How does it work to take the gospel to different peoples, by visiting our Northeast U.S. Mobilization Center, which is just up the road in Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania. Well, wherever you're serving, thanks for being a part of the team. I hope to see you next year live and in person. Until then, Godspeed.